The stadium erupted in thunderous roars as the crowd suddenly realized they were witnessing absolute history. Get ready to dive deep into the inner workings of an absolute miracle. This story goes far beyond a simple match report or a standard daily recap. We are going to forensically examine the exact methods used to create a giant upset on the court. We are looking at the stunning showdown between Alexandra Eala and Elena Rybakina. This is the unbelievable story that completely shook the entire tennis world while the action unfolded. The Abu Dhabi Open is taking place right now and delivering massive surprises. I will provide you with the major headlines and some highly significant news items from the tournament. Let us dive into a substantial and professional breakdown suitable for top-tier sports analysis. It is time to move directly into the highly detailed tactical breakdown of the match. We need to completely peel back the strategic layers of this fascinating on-court interaction. First and foremost, we must understand the dangerous elements that collided during this matchup. Those volatile elements were mixed together right inside the intense crucible of center court. The entire pre-match narrative centered heavily on a classic underdog taking on a giant. We must look at the challenger taking on the Ice Queen to truly understand this massive explosion. Let us set the scenario properly, because historical context is absolutely critical here. Elena Rybakina arrived in Abu Dhabi not merely as a fellow competitor, but as the ultimate woman to defeat. Prior to this event, she had put together an absolutely fantastic run. Her early hardcourt season was practically flawless and truly terrifying for her opponents. When you watch Rybakina play, you are witnessing the absolute pinnacle of first-strike tennis. She currently possesses one of the most thoroughly dominant serves in the history of the tour. According to the advanced statistics, her precise placement is just as crucial as her raw speed. Eala started sending back balls at incredibly strange and uncomfortable heights. Rybakina was constantly forced to bend her knees deeply just to handle the awkward returns. The tension kept brewing until 3 games, all at which point the massive upset began to ferment. Rybakina was easily cruising on her serve until she suddenly found herself down 0-30. 2 very odd and highly uncharacteristic unforced errors suddenly occurred in rapid succession. Eala then completely stopped Rybakina from establishing her rhythm on the following serve. Eala perfectly caught the ball on the rise and injected a massive kick of unexpected power. Rybakina was entirely taken by surprise as Eala fired a blistering backhand straight down the line. An absolutely stunned silence immediately fell over the entire packed stadium. Pens were undoubtedly hovering nervously over the notebooks of the international commentary crews. Rybakina heroically saved the breakpoints with booming aces in keeping with her elite champion mentality. However, the perilous seed of doubt had already been firmly planted in everyone's mind. Eala was no longer just trying to survive out there, but was actively hunting for her moment. The very first dramatic event that ultimately made the global headlines happened shortly after. The defining moment arrived right during the incredibly tense tiebreak of the opening set. It served as a massive momentum shift, turning the match into a brutal battle of pure attrition. Rybakina violently hammered a 100-mile-per-hour forehand deep into the corner of the court. Eala would scramble fiercely and amazingly managed to float a deep defensive lob back into play. That towering defensive lob landed perfectly right on the baseline to neutralize the aggressive attack. Eala brilliantly reset the point and shockingly won the first set by a score of 7-6. A wildly chaotic mix of exhilarating enthusiasm and utter confusion swept straight through the stadium. She was definitely outgunned in terms of pure power, but she absolutely outthought her opponent. Everyone in attendance was visibly registering the absolute shock of what they had just witnessed. The third-ranked player in the entire world had remarkably just surrendered a set to a wildcard entry. We are now getting a profound tactical lesson on the clash between heavy left-handed spin and flat power. Let us take a closer look at the technical elements that actively contributed to this massive disruption. Exactly what fundamental issues were causing such severe difficulties for the heavy favorite out there? We must ask why the international tennis community was left feeling so completely perplexed. Rybakina relies heavily on establishing a consistent baseline rhythm to dominate her matches. She heavily prefers it when the ball comes at her very fast so she can perfectly redirect its pace. It is basic tennis physics that the faster the ball enters, the faster the deadly rebound will occur. However, Eala simply would not let her opponent find that comfortable and rapid striking pace. Eala deliberately utilized off-pace shots and junk balling to brilliantly break the rhythm. She expertly deployed widely varying bounce heights and incredibly complex spin rotations. The underdog sent large top-spin loops that bounced uncomfortably high well beyond the favorite's shoulder. This strategic height drastically increased the overall chance of the heavy hitter finding the net. Being pushed backward, the tall competitor was constantly compelled to hit downward awkwardly. On the very next shot, Eala would entirely level out the trajectory and forcefully skid one low across the court. This constant disturbance of the strike zone resulted in explosive, unforced errors flying completely off the racket of the heavy favorite. The intense irritation was steadily becoming much more apparent out there on the court. Rybakina would frequently point at her racket and gaze up at her coaching box in sheer disbelief. However, the real problem had absolutely nothing to do with her equipment. Eala was brilliantly manufacturing incredibly difficult geometry all over the playing surface. The strategic interaction taking place during the cross-court exchanges was exceptionally important to the outcome. Eala continuously targeted the backhand of Rybakina with her heavy left-handed forehand cross-court shots. The typically rock-solid flat backhand of the Russian star was completely neutralized. The underdog was actively avoiding hitting anything flat and predictable into that powerful strike zone. She was instead hitting the ball at incredibly acute angles that produced massive downward dips. Rybakina was consistently being pulled way off the singles court to open up huge spaces for the underdog to secure her victories. Then came the critical second set, where the giant empire finally responded with tremendous force. The third-ranked player in the entire world certainly merits immense praise for her fierce competitive spirit. In that second set, it truly seemed as though natural order had completely returned to the tournament. The shocking drama unfolding for the Russian star briefly froze in its tracks. Rybakina grew visibly angry and decided to completely change her tactical approach. She drastically accelerated her serve speed rather than actively participating in those taxing, protracted rallies. She decisively started pulling the trigger on the very first or second shot of the rally. Rybakina easily captured the second set by a commanding score of 6-2, and it suddenly seemed as though the magical fairy tale was officially over. Eala was quite obviously dealing with significant bodily pain and mounting physical exhaustion. Chasing down those incredibly heavy ground strokes from Rybakina essentially felt like 45 minutes of non-stop wind sprints. The international commentators collectively relaxed their posture in the broadcasting booth. They confidently proclaimed that the natural restoration process had finally begun and order was restored. They firmly claimed that the clearly superior player had finally snapped out of her temporary slumber. But this is exactly where the explosive properties of this unforgettable match truly began to shine the brightest. The deciding set transformed into a brutal battle of physical attrition and immense mental willpower. The third set was the ultimate final act where true tennis legends are permanently forged. Eala miraculously returned to the court with what appeared to be completely fresh legs and a brand new top after taking a brief restroom break. That gripping third set honestly stopped looking like a traditional tennis match altogether. It felt much more like a heavyweight boxing competition, with both fighters trading massive blows. Games 1 through 4 consisted of gritty service holds, even though they were fiercely contested battles. After enduring deuce after deuce, the first serve percentage of Rybakina started to drop significantly, perhaps due to sheer fatigue or the unrelenting pressure from the wildcard. The score reaching 4 games all was without a doubt the most crucial turning point of the entire match. Rybakina suddenly found herself serving while facing a dangerous 30-all scoreline. Eala accurately predicted the exact trajectory of a massive serve traveling at 115 miles per hour and brilliantly blocked it right back into play. The two exhausted warriors then participated in an absolutely grueling 24-shot rally. Every single heavy hit of the tennis ball caused the anxious audience to visibly gasp for air. Rybakina finally made a desperate effort to aggressively wrap up the exhausting point. Her daring attempt at a scorching down-the-line winner barely missed the painted line by mere millimeters. That thrilling breakpoint conversion from Eala caused the entire stadium to absolutely explode with deafening noise. The stunned Russian onlookers in the crowd immediately put their hands over their heads in total disbelief. Eala spectacularly converted that pivotal break with a truly stunning and perfectly disguised drop shot. It was an extraordinarily audacious move to execute against a player of such immense skill, while she was serving at 5-4 in the match. Eala must have been feeling an unimaginable amount of mental and physical strain in that very moment. Everyone watching around the globe was simply waiting for the inevitable emotional collapse to occur right then and there. When heavy underdogs are on the verge of pulling off a massive upset, they frequently choke under the bright lights. They often experience severe dizziness and intense panic when the finish line is right in front of them. But instead, it was Rybakina who heroically fought back to save 2 consecutive match points. She aggressively found her targets on her risky second serves and eventually forced a nail-biting deuce at the very end. The heavy favorite then dramatically secured an advantage break point of her own right after that. The overwhelming sensation in the arena was that if she managed to survive this game, she would inevitably win the entire match. But Eala miraculously produced the absolute finest shot of the entire tennis competition when she needed it most. She executed a breathtaking forehand stroke right down the line while practically jogging at full speed. The brilliant shot incredibly caught the absolute back edge of the painted line. She forcefully struck that clean winner from completely outside the doubles alley and returned to her defensive crouching position while Rybakina even offered a sporting cheer. There would inevitably be massive global ramifications stemming from this legendary performance. But why did she amazingly decide to float a deep defensive lob back to the baseline in the first place, to truly rattle her opponent? Despite being severely outgunned in sheer firepower, during that crucial tiebreak, she proved that she was certainly not outthought as the entire crowd registered the absolute shock of the moment. The third-ranked player on the entire planet had incredibly just surrendered a crucial set to an unseeded wildcard on the biggest stage. We must deeply examine the specific technological and tactical elements that heavily contributed to this massive on-court disruption. The entire Russian tennis community was left completely perplexed as to what was actually causing these immense difficulties for a player so deeply passionate about establishing her rhythm. She heavily prefers it when the incoming ball approaches at a very high speed so she can effortlessly alter its fundamental physics and redirect the incredible pace. The basic science of tennis dictates that the faster the ball enters the strike zone, the faster the heavy rebound will naturally occur. But Eala flatly refused to let her opponent play that fast. Eala demonstrated the highest possible regard for utilizing junk ball tactics consisting of wildly varying heights and incredibly tricky spin rotations. When the tall competitor faces large top spin loops that bounce unpredictably high beyond her shoulder, the overall chance of her finding the net increases dramatically. She is constantly compelled to hit the ball in an awkward downward motion before Eala would deliberately level out the very next shot and forcefully skid a low ball just over the net. This constant and deliberate disturbance of the ideal strike zone directly resulted in explosive unforced errors flying completely off the racket of the heavy favorite. Her visible irritation was becoming much more apparent as she would frequently point at her racket and gaze up at her coaching box in sheer frustration. The fundamental problem had absolutely nothing to do with her equipment because the brilliant geometry of the tennis court was being masterfully manipulated by the massive underdog. The strategic interaction occurring during those intense cross-court baseline exchanges was exceptionally important as Eala continuously targeted the backhand side of Rybakina with heavy left-handed drives. The notoriously flat backhand of the heavy favorite, which is typically an absolute rock, was suddenly rendered completely ineffective because Eala fiercely refused to give her a clean target. She was consistently hitting the ball at an incredibly acute angle, causing it to dip sharply and constantly pulling Rybakina completely off the singles court to open up massive spaces for clean winners. Moving into the second set, the giant empire finally responded with tremendous force, and the third-ranked individual in the world certainly merits high praise for her fierce competitive spirit. Throughout that second set, it truly seemed as though natural order had officially returned, and the shocking drama briefly froze in its tracks as Rybakina grew noticeably angry. She decisively accelerated her average serve speed rather than engaging in those agonizingly protracted rallies and aggressively started pulling the trigger early in the point. Rybakina convincingly won the second set by a commanding score of 6-2, and it sadly seemed as though the magical fairy tale was definitively over. Eala was obviously experiencing immense bodily pain because chasing down those thunderous ground strokes essentially felt like enduring 45 straight minutes of non-stop wind sprints. The broadcasting commentators finally relaxed in their chairs and casually announced the beginning of the natural restoration process, while confidently claiming that the significantly better player had finally woken up. But this is exactly where the match became truly explosive, as the ultimate deciding set transformed into a grueling battle strictly based on physical attrition and immense mental fortitude. That dramatic third set was the spectacular final act, where lasting tennis legends are permanently written into the history books, as Eala miraculously returned to the playing court with entirely fresh legs. The final set completely stopped looking like a civilized tennis match and instantly transformed into a brutal heavyweight boxing competition featuring fiercely contested service holds through the first 4 grueling games. The overwhelming pressure applied by the unrelenting wildcard forced the situation to a highly crucial juncture at 4 games, all while facing a dangerous 30-all scoreline. Eala accurately predicted the exact trajectory of a massive serve traveling at 115 miles per hour and brilliantly blocked it safely into play. The 2 exhausted competitors then participated in an absolutely grueling 24-shot rally where every single strike caused the tense audience to gasp loudly. Rybakina finally made a desperate effort to aggressively wrap up the grueling point, but her scorching down-the-line winner attempt narrowly missed the mark by mere millimeters. The entire stadium absolutely exploded with deafening noise, while the completely stunned Russian onlookers in the crowd placed their hands over their heads in total disbelief. Eala incredibly converted that pivotal breakpoint with a truly stunning drop shot, which was an extraordinarily audacious move to attempt against a player of such immense skill. She must have been feeling an unimaginable amount of mental strain while serving for the match at 5-4, as everyone in the arena expected a monumental collapse in that precise moment. When heavy underdogs are standing right on the absolute verge of pulling off a massive upset, they frequently experience severe dizziness and tragically choke away the monumental victory. However, it was actually Rybakina who heroically fought back from the brink to valiantly save 2 consecutive match points by finding her exact targets on her risky second serves. The intense tension reached a massive boiling point during the final deuce, and the overwhelming sensation was that if the heavy favorite survived this game, she would inevitably win the entire match. But Eala miraculously produced the absolute finest shot of the entire competition by ripping a breathtaking forehand stroke straight down the line while practically jogging at full speed to catch the outside paint. She struck that glorious winner from completely outside the doubles alley, prompting even her fierce opponent to offer a sporting cheer as the inevitable ramifications of this legendary upset rapidly rippled around the globe.